Well, hello YouTube. I've been thinking about making a video like this for a minute, just kind of wanting to go over some of the Criterion collection, just some of the special DVDs and Blu-rays I've kind of gathered over the years. A little history just to why I still think like physical media, it has some sort of like prominence or like importance in my life. Probably most important is just how I grew up. I'm old enough to kind of growing up in like movie stores, Blockbuster Video, that kind of era. And that's kind of a big part of where my love for movies came from. You know, seeing the posters of movies up on the walls and just kind of excitement as a kid, going through and just seeing like the covers and like scanning through it. Even going as far as my mom would, when I was older, would sometimes leave me in a video store while she went like across the street to go grocery shopping, and she would get back with groceries, and I had this huge stack of movies. I'm like, all right, she's like, all right, you gotta like slim down, pick a couple, and we gotta get out of here because frozen stuff gets too warm in Arizona. And yeah, and another thing about physical media, obviously physical media doesn't last forever. DVDs, Blu-rays can get damaged, deteriorate over time. But obviously with streaming nowadays, there's a bigger accessibility to film and art that we've ever really have experienced before. The scary thing is just with streaming services is the constant rotation of things being added, taken off of streaming services almost on a whim, or to usually, I mean, sometimes if like a movie's bought by Netflix and then it's taken off by Netflix, it's like, where is it gonna go? What's like, that's just like a terrifying thought. So yeah, I do like to try to buy things when I can or when I shouldn't, and because obviously things cost money, especially Criterion collection. But here's a few of my favorite, or yeah, prized possessions favorite. I think the best way to start is with this giant behemoth Ingmar Bergman collection. Probably one of my most prized possessions. Probably the best deal that Criterion has. I think I picked this up for like $130. I bought it used from a record store that just had it available. But Ingmar Bergman is probably potentially my favorite director of all time. Especially, I kind of found out about his films at a really important time in my life. Probably, I think 14 through 16 is when I watched the majority of films of his that I've seen for the very first time. So, obviously, Seventh Seal, Persona, Hour of the Wolf, Fanny and Alexander, Wild Strawberries, what was it? Winter Light, The Silence. I remember seeing all of those movies very prominent, during that time, and what my personal connection to Ingmar Bergman would definitely be his stance. Well, I'm gonna say his stance on religion, but kind of like the anxiety or even like the horror of growing up in a very religious family, and even trying to pursue religion or like this type of spirituality that's being presented to you, and knowing very well that no matter how hard you try to lose yourself in it or how hard you try to believe in something in your brain is telling you it's impossible, that you can't ever believe in this thing. And that's something I've experienced just growing up like Southern Baptist, and being, queer as well on top of it definitely didn't help, especially at the time before I'd even came out even to myself. But I understood hell, I understood damnation, and even from a very young age, those ideas were mortifying, as they are to a lot of kids. I guess I'll bring this up here so you can see it. This is just an absolutely like outstanding collection, though. There's literally a school textbook worth of images and writing about his work in here. And almost every single thing up to Fanny Alexander he's made is in here as well. Oh, flip it back to the Persona side. One of the best filmmakers of all time, and yeah, very glad to have this. I've usually end up seeing a couple of his films once a year at least, and just inviting people over to watch Persona because that's the type of person I am. Fantastic collection. I love it. Next, one of my favorite films of all time, easily, I would say top 5, is House. I wish I knew how to pronounce the director's name. Nobuyuki Obayashi. I absolutely fell in love with this film as kind of an introduction to art house that isn't, I mean, in my mind I kind of think of art house as like having two sides. Like I think like slow cinema, and then there's stuff kind of like along this lane, a little bit more wacky or colorful, sporadic, very high pace, fast paced. And this movie, it kind of goes along, I feel like its cult following has definitely been kind of one that it's kind of just like a wacky, haha, so quirky film. But one of the things that I think about a lot when considering this film is the fact that his daughter basically wrote it, or at least very much co-wrote it. A lot of the ideas came from the mind of a young kid, what she thought was scary or cool or anything. And it basically, this film is a true reminder that cinema is completely without rules, boundaries, that you can create anything that you want. And I think that's what this film kind of embodies to me. It's sad that there's so many movies out there and so many rules established to what film has to be, or how a narrative has to be told, or even how, I mean, cinema, like David Lynch says like a million times over and over again, I mean, movies are a dream. There's nothing really quite like them. And in fact, now that movies exist, a lot of people, including myself, have had dreams that are in like a movie format. It's every single film, through the images, sound, story, narrative, are creating its own reality. And this is a lovely reality. I adore this film. Gorgeous movie. Oh, random one to pick next. Mishima, the Criterion Collection. Huge fan of Paul Schrader. I wish he was my grandpa. I love him when he says things I agree with. I love him when he says things I completely disagree with. Nonetheless, he has made many very interesting films in his lifetime. Mishima probably being my favorite. I think most people do generally consider this their favorite, including himself. Obviously, I didn't really know much about Mishima as a person before getting into this film, so to kind of watch it, and then I just kind of paused in the movie. I was like, what? Wait a second. And I learned about this absolutely, I want to say, extraordinarily interesting man, for sure. There's a lot to say in this film about repressed homosexuality. My sneaking belief that Paul Schrader is probably, almost certainly bisexual, but to a degree has just repressed it one way or another most of his life. And there's a very interesting association between repressed homosexuality as well as fascism, which is kind of Mishima's definitely fascism, nationalism, all of these things are kind of floating around in this movie, and I love the kind of dreamscapes, exterior design, when it's specifically going through his novels. It's so fascinating and such an amazing story, beautifully told, and obviously Philip Glass does the music on this thing. It's just, it has to be one of the best movies of the 80s. I still need to rewatch it. I've only seen it once. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it another time as well. The Human Condition. I have seen one of the 3 parts of this, and you can see RIP. Got this off of eBay used. Has a little break in the plastic. Don't really bother me much. A lot of eBay is kind of like my way of finding these movies for a reasonable price. It's an addiction, but I'm okay with it. I've only seen the first part of The Human Condition, and it broke me pretty much. I am almost afraid to keep watching it because I definitely don't think this is going to end well. Or, obviously I think this is going to be it's a very painful watch. The melodrama in this is heightened to a point where catastrophes that happen in real life, if you, besides hearing them on the news, obviously we're human. Sometimes we can't really connect the dots on hearing about something awful that happened and being visually present for the terrible things that happen and what systems bring them about. And human condition some way manages to put you very face front, very right there in an immediate kind of way. It's a glorious film, and something that I think what good writing really does, especially, is to create ethical dilemmas, and I think this film has many. Obviously, the main character kind of exists as a idealist, and he's put into situations that are so far removed from any sort of humanism, and it's just fascinating to see, what would you do if in this decision, when your choices are, these options, your life, your family, all these things can be at stake. What's the next step? And that the human condition definitely doesn't necessarily answer this, but it just tells a wonderful narrative about the human condition, ironically enough. The Color of Pomegranates. For a while, I think I would consider this my favorite movie of all time. It's completely insular. There's nothing like it. Nothing has come close. Even the director's other films don't really quite hit the same style and pacing and almost choreography of imagery that this one hits. The sequence specifically with the young adult sequence where it shows like a female and male version of them kind of looking back at each other at different glances is probably maybe my favorite sequence in film. And the hardest thing about this film is, for me, without having really a good enough understanding of the cultural relevance that it has of Armenian culture, it's hard to talk about it because it is very deep in imagery and abstraction. But for anybody that's interested in seeing a movie that they will never see anything like it again, it would be up there for me to recommend. Ooh. Chantal Akerman in the 70s. I've only seen News from Home. So this is just like, I got this collection, $20, and obviously it's like 5 films, so I was like, yeah. And I've seen News from Home, and I've seen Portrait of a Young Girl in Brussels, and I love both. News from Home I only saw after getting this, but obviously her most famous film I have yet to watch. I've kind of wanted to kind of build up to it and see what other films she has to kind of lead up to, even she considered that kind of like her final statement, despite making it so early on in her career. But obviously a really wonderful voice, a lot of poetry, despite very little. I mean, News from Home, oddly enough, is such a simple film. It's just different shots and locations of New York at the time with letters that she received from her mom. And it's such a visceral, personal film where, the separation between the personal and filmmaking is bare. There's nothing left to imagination. It made me, the last scene in particular is overwhelmingly emotional, and the shot starts, it's like a pretty extended shot, I believe at least 7 or 8 minutes, but it starts off very slowly, and then the image that you see specifically where there's this is never gonna leave my mind, with the birds, or you see birds going like up and down, like kind of swirling around within the frame, and there's this smoke, and you're leaving this place, or leaving New York. And yeah, really wonderful movie. Definitely kind of been more interested in seeing things that kind of take the personal a little bit more like up front and center like that. So yeah, look forward to the rest of those films. Really excited to see them and go from there. Oh, my most recent watch that I got was Inland Empire, which I've been able to find before the Criterion collection, so I'm extremely happy this exists, that they worked with David Lynch individually to do a faithful restoration, considering the film is very much visually based in digital noise as the aesthetic, but also kind of the creation of its own unique atmosphere. I think I would. My two favorite Lynch films are Fire Walk with Me and Mulholland Drive. I would probably rank this up there with, the way I see it, like those are two like S plus plus films. Like S is be this, Blue Velvet and Eraserhead. It's the most similar to Eraserhead in terms of for his feature film, feature film filmography. Specifically, it's one that he wrote, directed, edited, cinematography. He did all the parts related to it, and it's just an extremely powerful, odd work that, once again, kind of like House, definitely reminds me of the idea that, well, film just not really having any rules necessarily. All the rules that we think it has are just imposed through the century and a half or so that filmmaking has existed. And that's what makes this film so powerful. Laura Dern in this movie, it almost, despite him, David Lynch having the credits of like director, writer, and all these things, it feels like 50-50 Laura Dern and him. Laura Dern is outstanding and just completely believable in all these different scenarios and dreamlike, short stories that kind of line this in different realms of reality and placement. I would put. There's a documentary coming out specifically about David Lynch and the influence of the Wizard of Oz on his films. I would kind of separate his films from the influence of Wizard of Oz to the influence of Sunset Boulevard. This feels like this and Mulholland Drive are very much like Sunset Boulevard to me. I think it's definitely a more visually and psychologically intense retelling of that kind of story of losing yourself in a creation of yourself, losing yourself in narrative, finding yourself in those two things as well. Obviously, this film kind of follows three different paths. One of an actress playing a role in a story, and then the basically it's almost like the actress's life turns into the character's life, and then that turns into the Polish folktale that the story is based off of. There's this kind of three-dimensional layers that the film kind of grapples with, and yeah, just a gorgeous film. Recommend watching, you have to see it if you're a David Lynch fan. Would recommend it to anyone, even if it would make them suffer a little bit. Sorry, but cinema is good. Watch something that makes you feel weird and bad. Seven Samurai. I've only seen this once, actually. It's not really my favorite. I'm more of a fan of Kurosawa's. This is my cat Shrek. Hey Shrek. Kurosawa's more melodrama. It's kind of like Rashomon and Ikiru. But this is still. I'm not going to talk about this too much, just because it's just fantastic narrative. Some of the most revolutionary, progressive thinking in editing and narrative storytelling in film. Seven Samurai. Really good. Speaking of which, I have Rashomon right here. Love this movie. This is the first film I've seen from Kurosawa. I think I saw it on YouTube. I saw the opening 10 minutes of it on YouTube once as a kid, and it stuck with me. And I couldn't remember the name of it for so long, so when I finally saw it, I was like, oh my god. It's just one of those weird recollections that I have of it. Well, obviously this tells kind of a, I don't know what to say, moral dilemma, but more of a how we perceive things, how we recollect stories, and how once an event happens, our brains kind of create, literally, especially when we experience traumatic events, to a certain degree, events that happen externally from us are biologically manifested in our brain. Neurons are created for those very strong, very intense experiences. And obviously, humans are flawed. Humans don't see reality clearly because we're all individually experiencing it at the same time, and we all have our own experiences as well to reflect on that. And this film kind of just tells a really, really good story on that concept. So Love it. I have to have it. Wouldn't Can't go without it. Fassbender. Fox and His Friends. Probably my favorite Fassbender film. I have a unique soft spot, especially this and like what was it called? A Boy and His Band? I'm trying to remember what it's called. The William Friedrich gay psychological terror film. It's very similar to that. This one, especially in like queer culture, I think I don't know, there's a sense, like the liberal sense of queer community is very much utopian in an almost like consumerist fashion. It's pretty terrifying. And I'm queer. I have a boyfriend and lots of queer friends, and I love them, and we're all still like in our own ways damaged, not necessarily due to our own fault or a lot of it being from our very own existence and the world we live in. But to think that a queer film has to be one thing or the other is, especially the idea that a queer film has to specifically be utopian and that none of the issues that involve the rest of the world or inside the like LGBT community as well are displayed as kind of, there's places for that, but then there has to be places for a movie like this where it's all your gay friends eat your fucking heart out and you die. That's what I love about this movie. Fassbender plays the title character and he is amazing in it. Truly fantastic. Obviously the movie's about him winning the lottery and all of his petty bourgeoisie gays completely destroy him in every conceivable way until there's nothing left and he destroys himself in a sense. I find it very fascinating to think that you wrote, directed, and starred in this movie, that it's just him getting the living shit kicked out of him in different ways, physically, spiritually, like the entire thing. I love that. I don't know why that interests me so much. Yeah, I love Fassbender. This is probably my favorite of his. I've only seen 3 of his movies, all of them wonderful films. I think I only have Berlin Alexanderplatz from him. I have yet to see this. They did I got this one again. It's 940 minutes long. I am been very interested in very long, sweeping like narrative epics lately, so I'm really excited to kind of dig into this. I haven't yet, but yeah, really looking forward to it. I know Bellatar put it on his Sound and Sight top 10, so that kind of was a big like, okay, if I see that, I should get it. John Cassavetes. I have only seen Killing of a Chinese Bookie, A Woman Under the Influence, and Husbands from him. So I still have 3 to see on this set, and then, what's it called? Love Streams? I have that to see as well. I bought this just based off of seeing, I would have bought this off of seeing any of the 3 movies that I've seen. I have seen Mickey and Ricky, or Nicky? Wait, he just starred it, he didn't write it. That's Elaine May's film. But his performance in it is incredible. And the performances in all of his movies are unbelievable, out of this world. Like, cannot really put in the words. There's almost like a metaphysical, like, representation of the human spirit that he just, like, captures. And, like, not even, like, the entirety of his films, you just, like, blown away. But just, like, little moments that you feel so, like, this almost, like, telepathic, like, human connection that just kind of comes out. It's very much like lightning in a bottle that he just happened to catch multiple times throughout his career. Definitely worthy of being called, like, the father of American independent film, for sure. I think, in a lot of ways, recently, a lot of talk has been around, independent filmmakers being kind of picked up by, big Hollywood outlets to direct, like Black Panther. There's been too many to count. I think the most recent kind of controversy is the Greta Gerwig making like the Chronicles of Narnia film, specifically stating now she wants to direct bigger studio stuff. And I think John Cassavetes, I don't necessarily have too much of an opinion on that, more so than just systematically, like, I kind of get it. You know, become successful as a filmmaker, you probably want to have the success, that the financial and like economic security that comes with that success as well. John Cassavetes, on the other hand, probably would scream at these people and call them complete morons. And that's what I love about this man. A lot of really good Peter Falk kind of interactions that I've read with him, talking about like the way like that is his view of it, you know. But on the other hand, he had probably a hard life. He died young, I believe, from liver disease, possibly related to alcoholism, and you know, that is, I get it. He's probably worked his ass off to be able to make films, more so than what other people have had to do, especially in this era that he lived in. So, much respect, much love, John Cassavetes. Ooh. Ahsan. I can't pronounce this one. It's so sad that I can't pronounce it. I love this film. I love Bresson. I think probably another top 5 filmmaker for me. A lot of the movies I saw my like kind of mid-adolescence, I reacted to the same way. I watched, and the whole time I just feel so stunted and unusual the whole film, until usually the very last scene, in which I would proceed to cry for like 10 minutes straight. I've read Mouchette actually as well, the book, which is a great book, but the film does exactly what the book does, just better, which can't be said a lot of the times. The book's very similar. It's like 1-to-1 almost of the events, but obviously visually told. Very visual filmmaker. The only filmmaker where you can't really say, you know, like the performances it is more of like a puppet show than regular performances. And really, if you view the films that way, and you view this framing of shots that way, as if they were puppets instead of actors, or like he called them, models, I think a lot of what he's trying to do becomes a little bit easier to kind of get that perspective on what he's trying to do. Yeah, really, truly, kind of a miserable film here, but in that sense, it's also beautiful. So, love it. Now, I just watched this recently. The story of Chikamatsu. Sorry, man. I should have prepared this. Another name for it, The Crucified Lovers. And the only other film I've seen from this director is Yugetsu, which I also love. This movie is amazing as well. So, shocker there. As you can see, if you go on eBay and look for what public libraries or Goodwills around America are selling, you can get Criterion Collection movies cheaper than you can anywhere else. And that is what I do. This is a beautiful, melodramatic, almost Romeo and Juliet style love story that everything is the only little thing I guess I'll talk about in this film is something that you don't see in other films that you see in his films. Another one person kind of influenced by playwrights, and specifically, I forgot the name of it, but basically puppet stories, but in Japan. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's not coming to me. In most melodramas, you see lots of crying. You see lots of close-ups of faces. But in this film, you see a much more physical performance. They're throwing their whole body to the ground or into the arms of another person. And not a lot of films kind of capture the sense of meaning and beauty, especially in the face of societal oppression like this one. Yeah, this film's definitely much related to the intersection between the patriarchy and class as well. That's why it's good. Night of the Hunter. I watched this on Prime with my boyfriend, and that was the second time I've seen it. Once a long time ago, when I was a teenager, I saw this film as well, And rewatching it, I immediately started to look for a copy of this because it's, I think, an extremely pertinent story in America right now. Specifically, America being, well, slowly kind of, not slowly, but very, very prominently turning the religious right wing having such a prominent political and social power in America, and those powers stemming directly from, our history, the KKK, the FBI, that it's the low fantasy elements in this kind of give it this spiritually crushing and spiritually almost parasitic view of that kind of mindset and that kind of the way you look at other humans hurting when the children escape and they finally get basically adopted by the most wonderful character in cinema history. It's such a relief, and you just feel your heart being lifted. And there's so many gorgeous scenes in this film, so many amazing sets, most particularly the set after Robert Mitchum marries the widow of these two kids' mom, and it's their honeymoon, and he basically yells at her and puts her down for the idea of having sex on your honeymoon, that she would be like a disgusting or sinful person for that, and the specific room decoration is like the outline of like a church, and the scene where you see her corpse at the bottom of the lake in her car and her hair is just flowing in the water. The low fantasy dreamlike elements really do kind of elevate this film into something that's never been replicated ever since. I think, this, especially growing up in the kind of like religious right-wing environment, this was a very powerful film to see, and I would recommend anybody that kind of has that background, especially maybe Southern America, but really any part of America that kind of permeates that kind of culture and that kind of mindset. Now, Ozu. I think the only one I've seen off of this is Early Spring. I also have... Where is my Tokyo Story? Because I also own Tokyo Story as well. It appears to be... Oh, there it is. Tokyo Story. I have the kind of bulky DVD. I'm not... some people are really big, Blu-ray people. Some films, I think I probably be more interested in that than others. I have the Lord of the Rings on 4K. That's the only thing 4K I own, just because it's the Lord of the Rings. I watched Fellowship of the Ring a million times as a kid. They're classics. Tokyo Story and Ozu, not so much interested in. Just glad that I have these so I can watch them and revisit them when I please. Tokyo Story was the first film I've seen of his. Definitely a life-changing moment for me. I think I was 17 and immediately got way farther into film after seeing this than ever before, because it's such a simple story. It's a simple images, simple story, but yet the emotional complexity of his films and the way he tells his stories, and specifically how the use of, I don't want to say the use of, but time in Ozu films allow such a open inhale of narrative and emotions and feeling, and give you time to ponder and dream. And I think that's what makes this film so gorgeous. Everything's so direct, but there's also this time to just kind of live in these characters' shoes. And possibly my favorite just narrative filmmaker. Most of his films kind of follow under slice of life dramas, a little bit melodramas, but I wouldn't say melodramas from what I've seen. I think people are more realistically almost stilted in his films. The stories may be narratively melodramatic, but the performances never are. And the way he shoots and the way he directs his actors never is that way. Second favorite Lynch, Mulholland Drive. my love to tell the story of this because this is the first film of his I've seen. I actually my two favorite films of his were this and Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, and those are the first Lynch films I ever watched. Uh, both of them not knowing who David Lynch is or anything about him, which and at a very young age, I think maybe 15, late night on HBO when the rest of my family was asleep, and I would try to get away with watching things that were R-rated. So yeah, having that kind of experience with it probably in my mind kind of like elevates these films. But I do think nowadays, and I've seen them all multiple times. Rewatching David Lynch films at different parts in her life, very much like kind of interacting with something differently every time. You know the kind of narrative, the themes, some of the images or the what happens like narrative wise, but you're truly interacting with it differently when you're a different person and you've experienced different things. Definitely certain scenes stand out to you more, make you feel way more or way less or different. So Mulholland Drive is possibly the Fire Walk with Me is my favorite, but this is probably the like perfect Lynch film. There's really nothing in it that I would say I could try to make a criticism of or anything. It is, yeah, a love story in the city of dreams. That's what it says on here. I'll just stick with that. I don't have anything else I want to say about it at the moment. Mikuru. I'm trying to remember what the translation for that is. To live. That's a perfect title for this film. My favorite Kurosawa film, like easily bar none. Nothing compares to Ikaru. It's a very simple story, rather simple way of telling it. No, I would say actually what narratively it does is very interesting. Obviously, if you've seen this film, I've kind of spoiled a couple of these films along the way. Sorry, spoiler culture. But about a little bit over halfway into the film, the titular character passes away and we're at his funeral, and we only get to hear about the acts that he made after he had this change of worldview from the people that he worked with that knew him for many, many years. And yeah, this film makes me cry a lot. I think it kind of, at the time I saw it, I didn't know this, but it definitely put me in the career path that I am now. I'm a nurse. So, I realized going into, like, after graduating high school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something. If you have to make money, and in that essence in America, make more money for somebody else with your labor, I wanted to at least do something where I could help people. And I wanted to be a teacher, social worker. Those are like kind of my two. I kind of fell out with social work because it's literally a nightmare job to do. I have a lot of respect for social workers, but I couldn't do it. Nursing is a little bit more immediate to me. I definitely feel like I chose the right path in that sense. Well, that path kind of chose me when I was a dishwasher and I wanted to make more money. I was a dishwasher at a nursing home specifically, and I wanted to make more money, so I was just like, I'll become a CNA and make a little bit more money, and then I fell in love with it, changed my career path and everything. And what Ikaru does was obviously it's a tale of a kind of a bureaucrat who finds out he has stomach cancer and not much longer to live, and uses the last bit of time he has to build a public park. And yeah, it already makes me want to cry just saying that out loud. So, really gorgeous story. I really love this film. The scenes in the first half are really wonderful. There's a couple, one dream sequence, but there's just this downtrodden, him going through bars and be just completely overwhelmed with the misery and kind of the lack of value that he's had on his own life. And it's what makes this film so amazing to me is kind of being a wake-up call in a lot of ways for what working and living under like a capitalist system does to you spiritually, in that sense, depriving your life of value through through capital, through the commodification of your own work and not being able to see what your work does, or creating lots of work in this world that doesn't provide any sort of real value to the world, because that's another form. I mean, for me, that's a form of, spiritual torture, is to work to have to live, but not have that work be something that you can see visibly, or feel, or just have that notion that you feel like it has contributed something to others and the world around you. And this film very much deals with that notion. I haven't seen these two. I've seen the clips of the Red Shoes, makes me want to watch it. The Friends of Eddie Cool, just Robert Mitchum's in it, and it looks gritty, New Hollywood, and I love New Hollywood, so I'm excited to watch it. I haven't, also, I'll just go through the ones I haven't seen. I haven't seen the Apu trilogy. Thank you, I can't even pronounce that, District Library. Oh, another library one that I got, thank you. And I bought Safe as well from the Atlanta Public Library, thank you as well. Or Safe. Really excited to watch both of these. I think Safe is probably my next to watch film. I'm really interested in Todd Haynes as a director, so glad to watch. That's a movie from him I'm definitely most interested in. 8.5. I haven't seen this in a long time. I bought it just to kind of rewatch it again. Got this one from a Goodwill on eBay. It's a DVD. Like I said, doesn't have to be anything. It has a booklet in it, second disc for special features. Call me in, I will buy it. Assistantly Fellini I've seen too, actually. This film has stuck with me though. I think if you've seen it once, there's images from it that aren't ever going to leave your head. I really need to rewatch it though. I can't really tell you. I know obviously it's about a director that's has writer's block, very similar to what Fellini was going through, but it's very dreamlike, very personal, and yeah, one of those classics that holds up to everything anyone has ever said about it. 400 Blows. I bought this to watch with my boyfriend because it's a masterpiece as well. I think what it captures so well is that feeling as you're a child that there's something wrong with the world around you, and you don't have the words or the wisdom to really understand what that is. You just have the feeling. And that feeling is kind of what permeates this film throughout its very short runtime. I believe it's like 90 minutes long. Not 99 minutes. Still a pretty short film. Obviously one of the best ending scenes in cinema history, though. Like I said, that energy and all the feelings that you feel of injustice kind of culminate into this one climactic scene where the main character just runs. That there's nowhere left for that emotional energy to go besides to have physical movement. And yeah, really wonderful film. I think now I'm through my Criterion. Now I just kind of have some oddballs that I kind of want to talk about too. Most specifically, I have 4 films from Obayashi, the director of House. This was the first set I've ever bought that I realized I couldn't watch without a Region 2 DVD player, so I am going to find another way to watch it or cry. I'll figure out a way to watch it. I need to see these films. Gorgeous set though. Really love. I'm sad I actually haven't really gone through what these all these DVDs look like, but they did a really wonderful job with this one, despite the fact the DVD just fell out of its case. But really gorgeous work done here. Really excited to view it. It saddens me that he's really only known in the West for House, when it is extremely clear after I saw his last film, Labyrinth of Cinema, that he really does have an entire career of extremely inventive, gorgeous work that is hard to find, or very inaccessible here, and very critically just forgotten, which is a travesty. It is extremely clear after I saw his last film, Labyrinth of Cinema, that he is a very singular artist with his own vision and his own brilliance, completely a unique I don't want to say auteur, just a unique individual. He made this film and his other last film, Hanagatami, while dealing with cancer, and this woman particularly stage 4 cancer. So kind of amazing. It really does have that kind of sense of finality of what somebody, if somebody instead of having last words that they say but could create a last feature film before they die, this is it. Really wonderful film. A little intense to watch. I actually kind of separated it into 3 1-hour sittings because it's extremely dense. It's the equivalent of watching 3 films on top of each other at the same time. So it can be a little intense to watch, but it's absolutely worth it. The limited edition Blu-ray, super cool. Costs way too much money, but it is worth it. Comes with a lot of really interesting memorabilia, such as this little like note card of it, a little booklet, lots of special features, interviews with his daughter and his wife. Highly recommend. He's not somebody to sleep on or just watch House and say that was so quirky. Really dive into it and see what was he trying to say. This film is an art. He truly believed that film could change the world and spent his career trying to do that as well. Satan Tango. I just watched this for the first time this year, and surprise, surprise, it is immediately like one of my favorite films of all time, probably top 10. Another film that delves very much into long, epic narrative storytelling, except obviously in Bellatar's unique fashion. Truly one of the most mesmerizing films I've ever seen. Time kind of ceases to exist externally. Internally, how you perceive time changes once you get lost in this film. One person walking from a house to a small like forest, even it seems like maybe like a quarter mile away, and you watch them do it. It feels like seconds, oddly enough. And this kind of dreamlike atmosphere, fantastical atmosphere that kind of comes from this film, despite there being nothing in it that is fantasy, is startling. And there's one place in my mind where the bar scene never ends and they are continually dancing for all of eternity. So worth experiencing. If you're afraid of it, I wouldn't be against. The film is set into, I believe it is it 14 chapters? All I know is that each chapter is present or like progressing in the future and one in the past, like kind of back and forth. I believe it's 14 chapters, but I do recommend if you're a little bit afraid to watch it, it's worth watching. Separate it into a few different parts. Take a little break from it, let it kind of like sit with you. I think Bellatar was probably against that notion, considering he very specifically made a very, very long movie that's very, very slow and kind of builds in its own universe and its own way of thinking about time in film. But it's worth watching even if you have to separate it. Please give it a shot. Maybe watch The Turin Horse first, or I want to say, I can't pronounce it right, or Reckmester's Harmony. I know the book is a Melancholy of Resistance. Watch that one first as well, just to kind of like ease yourself into his kind of style of filmmaking. Not a bad idea. I saw those films before this, and I think it kind of made it a little bit easier to know what was happening and what feelings do I need to think about and kind of let myself to feel while watching this. Amazing film. I Am Cuba. I have the special. I know it's free on YouTube to watch this film, which I found out after buying this. And who knows, they'll probably do like a Criterion or something. But I love the Cuban cigar design of this. Lots of reading material, a documentary about the filmmaker, and some other special documentary on the making of, and a documentary about the filmmaker. Both full-length films are on here. Obviously, I got this for the film I Am Cuba, which is, oddly enough, I think the closest thing I've seen to I Am Cuba represented on film is the cinematography style of it is Shadow of Forgotten Ancestors, which is another film by the director of Color of Pomegranates before he made Color of Pomegranates. It is very much visual poetry. There is narratives here, but they're almost very much like silent film narratives where dialogue doesn't have to be there for you to understand what's happening, who these characters are. This film is very much the true, like, underlying dream of revolution, what that dream entails, and how we as humans kind of push that away or allow it to or kind of consume us. And gorgeous film. Some of my favorite scenes in film are on this. Particular, my favorite story is the sugarcane farmer story in this. Probably then the story of the young university student as well. But the sugarcane story visually is so gorgeous. The camera, like, it's just a kind of synopsis of it. An elderly sugarcane farmer, after years and years of working, finally kind of has a break. His fields are overflowing with sugarcane. His children, who have now become young adults, are helping him on the farm, and he thinks this is finally his opportunity for his children to have a better life than his own. And then he finds out that the land that his farm is on has been sold, and that his house has been sold as well by his landlord, and that he has to move out. And in just this fleeting bit of righteous anger and despair, he gives his children the last money that he has and burns the entire farm and his house down. And it's sad is just to kind of think of, obviously this film kind of has that reputation of being propaganda, what that means, but that is just what happened in Cuba. That is one story that represents thousands of people's lives in Cuba, but in a sense, all around the world. Stories like that happen. And it gives, the way it's told, as obviously the camera throughout these scenes kind of just, especially in the beginning, just zooms inside of the sugarcane field, and it's just so gorgeous and dreamlike, and obviously it's all taken away from him. Really powerful film. Definitely am going to watch it again. I've only seen it once recently. Herzog might be another one of my favorite directors, up there with Bergman. Obviously, I think I primarily am just obsessed with most of his the films he made, 1970, 1980. I haven't seen Fitzcarraldo yet, though, so I might change. Might move it up a little bit, a few years, but pretty much, I haven't seen Wozzeck either. Alright, I lied many times. Strozek, Ingmar of Caspar Hauser, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, Fata Morgana, Even Dwarves Started Small. All amazing films. My favorite being the Ingmar of Caspar Hauser. That would be my top 10. I am obsessed with that movie. He is, bar none, above anything else, a visual poet. And he has a couple of interviews that kind of talks about the idea of creating that perfect image that distills something inexplicably true about humanity that isn't ambiguous, but it still relies on abstraction in a sense. And he's spent his whole career just kind of looking for those shots, and I think nothing really exemplifies that more so than his first feature films that he put out. Ingmar of Caspar Hauser just being an odd one, just because, it was after he kind of received all this success for The Wrath of God, and he made a movie that I think is better than Wrath of God, oddly enough. Heart of Glass, I need to maybe rewatch again. It's kind of a weird one. Obviously, a lot of his the premise of it, the kind of, what it's famous for is all of his actors were under a form of hypnosis while filming it. So that's kind of a weird thing. I remember liking it just being kind of, not having it kind of hit the same way that Strozek or his other films do. Strozek's another one. I think the first film of his I saw besides The Wrath of God that kind of just floored me. My favorite I don't know if it's a quote in the movie or somebody said it about the movie, but Germany's a place that beats you physically. America is a place that beats you spiritually. Has never kind of rung more true, in my opinion. It's very much about a film about America looking in and being like, oh fuck, this is terrible. So, really good film. I think Wrath of God is still probably the best place to start with Herzog if you're kind of looking to get into it. I didn't even talk about Even Dwarf Started Small. I love Even Dwarf Started Small. It is pure chaos, pure brilliant anarchic energy. Gorgeous film. And Nosferatu the Vampire is a wonderful remake as well. I am interested to see what... forgot his name. Mr. Lighthouse and Northman, the witch guy. He's I guess he's finished filming his remake. Curious to see what that's going to be like. An American remake of Nosferatu seems very interesting. I don't own a copy of Nosferatu, the original, which is sad because it's one of my favorite. I saw it when I was 8 and it changed my life. The Folklore trilogy. I've only seen 2 of these films. I absolutely adore them. I've seen them 5 times at least each. Probably seen Song of the Sea more because I think Wolfwalkers might be my favorite, but I think Song of the Sea is kind of their perfect picture. It's much more neatly compacted and everything kind of lines up in place. Wolfwalkers has some kind of ups and downs, but one particular scene near the end, screen splits in half, and Sean Bean's character in it specifically says, "I'm scared." I'll just be kind of brief with it without really spoiling much. Gets me every single time and hurts deep down in my soul, in sense of wishing that the beauty that exists in humanity could be free from the systems in place to benefit some and destroy and use the majority. There is a little poster in here I didn't know about, or that I forgot existed. I wouldn't mind hanging this up. I believe it's just the same cover. I highly recommend watching these films if you're a fan of animation or if you're just a fan of good storytelling in general. They're equally on par with one another. Just rewatched Song of the Sea with my boyfriend. He had never seen it before, and I cried a lot again. Let's see if I can get this in without damaging it. Might just try to repeat this off camera. There we go. Almost done. Last, I have a kind of a impromptu filmography of Peter Watkins. Thank God. These ones weren't region blocked. I was really afraid of that. They came from France, and they're not region blocked. This has all of his movies, for the most part, except Edvard Munch, which is my favorite movie because it's a complete masterpiece. I think the Ingmar Bergman quote says it was a work of genius. It is hilariously enough done in an office-style mockumentary, but much before that kind of style became only evident of comedies. It's a very serious, very gorgeous film about art and life, trauma, mental, physical illness. An extremely poetic film despite the fact that it's shot in this documentary style. What kind of resonates the most with me is its editing. It's probably the best editing in any movie I've ever seen. I don't know if I even remember this properly, but there's a scene where the narration describes him falling in love for the first time over images of his mom coughing up blood that he remembered from his childhood. There's so many scenes like that where the narration and just different parts of his life are kind of compiled on top of each other, on top of his art too. And there's nothing really quite like it. It's a very long film. It's 221 minutes. It is worth every second to see something unlike anything you've ever seen before. Obviously, there's a lot of non-actors in this film as well, which I think he does a wonderful job with. Some people might be kind of put off by it because there are times when it doesn't feel like there's like necessarily like professional performances, but who fucking cares when what you have to say is on display in such a potent, meaningful way than this film. I based off of seeing this, I went and grabbed this. I know Punishment Park is available just like on YouTube in full. I think Edvard Munch is too. I don't know for how long, but Punishment Park is the only film I've seen on this one. My next is La Commune, which is very kind of a bit of an undertaking. It's 345 minutes. Definitely gonna watch that one though as well, and the others. But Punishment Park is also a masterpiece. Completely blew me away, having high expectations already. It is a film made almost in response to, I'm going to forget the name of the school. The National Guard murdered students at a university that were protesting the Vietnam War. It was made. I've done so much research on that. I can't believe I don't remember the event of it off the top of my head right now. But it's made in response to that. It is all again shot in like this mockumentary style way, having lots of kind of fourth wall breaks of the camera and the narrative, kind of different layers of that. All non-actors giving unbelievably good performances that are shocking and more relevant right now. As relevant, if not more relevant now than they were back then in terms of, well, where the world was going. A lot of people kind of talk about like the hippie era as kind of a joke, but really that was the last and the biggest left-wing movement in America that was completely abolished by, murder, the FBI, the death of Fred Hampton, the destruction of Rainbow Coalition, the Black Panther Party, through violence and terror and any means possible. And obviously there's other critiques of it that I think are important to kind of look at that era and see how these methods of protest and revolution didn't really bring up of any change. In fact, the Reagan era was just looking right around the corner. But still one of the greatest leftist films of all time is Punishment Park. Extremely powerful work, extremely unsettling, and really really good. Yeah, I'm gonna watch it again when I stay away from nicotine and coffee for a minute, because it is very anxiety inducing movie. It's kind of a tough watch, to be honest, and they're collapsing on me. That's okay. I have the collected works of Hayao Miyazaki. What's there to say? My current favorite is Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, which I haven't watched. I watched once, kind of back when I first saw a lot of these movies as a teenager, and rewatched twice recently, and it has come to become my favorite. I just bought the graphic novel or manga of it that he wrote himself and drew himself, and I'm extremely excited to kind of learn more about this story, this world that he created that the movie kind of just hints at barely. My favorite thing about that movie, there's so many little moments of just little embellishments of there being more to this world, but also just the humanism on display in Nausicaa is, I think, my favorite display of Miyazaki's humanism is in Nausicaa. The little scene, couple scenes with the village, the Valley of the Wind villagers, where one of the workers talks about his hands being deformed and from working his whole life, but his king and the people that he's lived with, his community, see them as beautiful for what they have created for each other. And especially the old I don't want to say witch, but like the old wise woman is like my favorite character. She's actually who I want to be when I grow up. But at the very end, and they're all kind of facing their own mortality, she says, if this is our time to die, then so be it. Or something along those lines. If this is our time to go, then this is what we have. But she still never stops fighting. Reminds me almost of the Aragorn line, if there's nothing left, and there's no hope left, you have vengeance. That's kind of a beautiful statement. When there's nothing left in the world, there's no hope, there's no chance of achieving the world, somewhat of a just society or just world, then you still have Vengeance. Really gorgeous film. I can talk about all of these movies a lot, but I'm not going to. Maybe another day. They're all worth talking about a million times over. I think I'll probably do this last. This I picked up somewhat recently on a sale from Arrow. I only have 2 Arrow films. I got this, and then I got Pulse, which I adore Pulse as well. Saw that one also kind of on a whim as a kid without really knowing anything about it, and it just completely terrified me, more so than I'm used to be like really into horror as a young kid. I saw like I ran into like Itchy the Killer from Blockbuster, and and Dead Alive, the Peter Jackson film, a bunch of times. Obsessed with like Evil Dead 1 and 2, so horror was kind of my thing. Every film terrified me. These films terrify me too, in a different way. Tetsu the Iron Man just fucking slaps. Queer classic. Fuck the Babadook. Yeah. Tetsu 1 and 2, gorgeous. I haven't seen the third one. It kind of looked I don't know about that. But I've seen Tetsu 1 and 2, the short film that's on here, his first short film. I love all 3 of those so much, I can watch them every single day. They are just visually, he has this energy to him that rips. They're the most viscerally entertaining movies to me, and might say something about me, I don't know, but I love them. Tokyo Fist is fantastic as well. It's a weird little love triangle, very kind of Cronenberg-esque story, but obviously his own spin on it. Everything is his own, which is why he's cool enough to have his own little case like this. Bullet Ballet's also really good. Kind of more of like a taxi driver, more set in reality. Still has this flair though. I'm very interested in seeing Kodako most out of the rest of these. Kodako, and then probably the short film, I think it's called Haze. Those are my 2 I haven't seen that I want to see. Kodako is another film I don't think I'm going to watch with any caffeine or nicotine in my system, my 2 favorite drugs, because it looks terrifying. Especially I'm a parent. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and a lot of this movie kind of talks about a young mother suffering from severe, almost violent hallucinations and bouts of self-harm, and it looks amazing, but it does look like a film that might kind of reach into places that I'm unfamiliar with or have been familiar with but don't want to think about ever on a daily basis or just in general. But there's still art's still worth exploring those things anyway, and I think that's kind of a theme of a lot of his films in a lot of different ways. Even his later films, they become visually much different, but he's still kind of exploring themes of taboo subjects very explicitly, and more power to him for that. I think actually, alright, I do have the Twin Peaks collection. Obsessed with Twin Peaks. Fire Walk With Me, I'll tell this little story about seeing it for the first time as the ending to this little video. Without having seen the show or anything David Lynch related, I happened upon Fire Walk With Me as, I think, a 13-year-old doing the same thing on HBO in the middle of the night when my family was sleeping, wanted to watch a weird movie that I don't think I would have been allowed to watch otherwise. And it easily the most terrifying movie experience of my entire life. I love the setup of this case. I love everything Twin Peaks. I've seen the original show 2 times, and I'm kind of gearing myself to watch The Return again. I watched The Return as it was airing episodically and was basically in a state of ecstasy for those months of my life until the last episode happened, and I basically, would make anyone go into a depression. That kind of, the air of that last 2 episodes basically permeates your being and everything you do for a little bit. Paul Schrader mentioned this in an interview about trying to capture the cultural zeitgeist in his films, like First Reformed, The Card Counter, and I haven't seen Master Gardener, but he's trying to kind of attempt the same thing again, and for better or worse, kind of hitting it or missing it in different parts of his career. I think the cultural zeitgeist has never been more perfectly captured at this moment than Twin Peaks: The Return. I also have that on DVD up there. It's nothing really fancy or cool about it. I wanted to show this one off instead and just talk about Twin Peaks: The Return. Fire Rock With Me, going kind of back to Fire Rock With Me though, as kind of the split between the original series and the return, it is the perfect interlude for that, while standing on its own as one of the most terrifying but gorgeous stories about one person. There's, I think David Lynch kind of understands this. I forgot where I heard this from, but as like a group, I think somebody was asked, like, as a group of people, I hate them, but in like an individual, you can see the cosmos, the stars, you can see everything gorgeous in a single person at any given time. This film kind of gives that kind of cosmic story to something that that is very real and very terrifying. Gives a person a chance to matter on a cosmic level, despite their death, their life being short-ended, sad, miserable, terrifying. There is also beauty in that, and I think it's a very hard, very difficult task to do, is to make the life of somebody who is suffering so much beautiful. And I think that's what Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me accomplishes, and that's why I love it so much. It's the only film, seen it 3 times, and again, different parts of my life, different understandings of my own childhood, or different things I've experienced. It hits differently every time, and yeah, really great film. I think that's it. I now have a terrifying large collection of movies that have fallen onto me to my side. I'm probably going to make more film related videos in the future. Maybe not use my laptop camera, which looks like it's in 480p. We'll see. At the very least, I like talking about movies, doing this kind of stuff. I mostly talk about video games. For some reason, I grew up with it in a different way. I think video games are the easiest to talk about, then film, then music, and then books. So yeah, that's kind of just the way my brain works. Anyway, like having physical collection means I can look at these movies, remember they exist, watch them. Means I can look at them now, just kind of spurt out the first things that come to my mind, just looking at their cases and kind of reminding myself of what different feelings or thoughts that I've had that those films kind of gave me when I saw them, and what does that give meaning or enjoyment to my life? In a lot of ways, yes, it definitely does. So that's why I keep watching them. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, bye bye.